All right, we are back with more NFL coverage, and in this one, I'll be covering all the developments from and centering around Week 15. And man, I'm just gonna say it right now. A lot of it does consist of injuries of varying severity. It was just that kind of time where you're getting down the stretch of the year, and a lot of it, when it comes to entering the playoff atmosphere, is getting hot at the right time, but it's also about being as healthy of a roster as possible. And you typically see some of the better teams, at least in recent years, suffer early exits because of constantly losing the war of attrition throughout the year, unfortunately. Again, some of these injuries are, as I've already said, with the Mahomes and Parsons injuries going to have a tremendous effect on how their teams are able to move forward throughout the rest of the year. And others are really just adding on to the potential turmoil that other teams are facing right now, or the downtrodden seasons that they've already had. So to get straight into it, the Jets would be without Mason Taylor as he sat out of Sunday's game against the Jaguars with a neck injury at the time. The man that actually emerged is a solid option, no matter who was at quarterback for the team in the earliest stretch of the season. And he's come on as a solid weapon for them. But that is also a little bit by default, given that Garrett Wilson hasn't been in, and they haven't had a lot of consistency from their true wide receivers, although Adonai Mitchell has also managed to have a couple of solid games over the past few weeks or so. And by nature, with them struggling to even throw the ball consistently enough and settling for all these short routes, Mason Taylor's become a valuable piece of this team's offense. So I don't really know how much of an impact it would have had given how badly they lost on Sunday. But it's terribly unfortunate for a person who looked as though he was hitting his stride. So you hope he can recover from that. I am not sure about his status for the next Jets game. That hasn't come out yet, but we'll definitely see. Hopefully he's able to play. Marvin Harrison Jr. remains out with a heel injury. He sat out against the Texans. He actually, per multiple reports from NFL insiders, was practicing yesterday, but was limited in it as it's still nagging him at this point. So his availability for the next Cards game is still in question somewhat. And, I mean, by this point, the Cardinals have already tanked the year. I don't think that's a secret. But you want to, at the very least, I believe, unless they're really trying to go for a top pick in the draft, they want to, in my mind, finish out strong. So you could potentially make that happen without him, given how Michael Wilson has just emerged as a complimentary piece alongside Trey McBride over these past few weeks. But you'd love to have him out there and try to salvage something from this. Play with some pride, whatever you got to do to close out this season in a reasonable way for your fan base to stomach. David Njoku would be out of the game against the Bears with a knee injury. Hopefully he recovers from that. But definitely in that game, even if they had David Njoku out there, it wouldn't have really changed the outcome. And it's interesting too. I mean, they've still just been in a weird spot. Like, I was shocked that they kept a hold of David Njoku, to be honest with you. But I really don't know what their decision would be on this. Seeing how Harold Fannin Jr. has sort of taken over the main tight end role here. And even when Njoku is in, you're playing off of him and in tandem with him after for years being the unquestioned starter there. So I don't know. Dealing with this kind of stuff adds even more insult to injury and could affect some different things when it comes to front office decisions in the offseason. Still, though, if he's going to miss time and you were not able to move him, then I really don't know, again, what the game plan would be for the Browns here. But maybe if he is able to come back, he gives himself a chance to at least get out there. And by and large, the front office has a chance to see where the value lies in his ability as a player and worth as a player on the market, if that's what it comes down to. Again, you gotta make sure he's out there on the field. So it's terrible that he had to go through that. Alvin Kamara would also be out of the Saints game against the Panthers with a knee and ankle injury. His injuries have been nagging him for quite some time now. And I'm sure at this point, the goal is to obviously get back out there for Alvin Kamara at 100% health. But I think with the way that things have gone, a lot of different shit could be running through Alvin Kamara's mind right now. Like, Njoku, yeah, I mean, they've caught themselves in that spot, and that's fair. But I think that Kamara is in a similar but different situation here. I mean, the Saints have invested in him. Understandably, he might have taken a few steps back. But at the same time, his sentiment is that, okay, like at least, they've given me a chance to make something happen, but they still have not shown the desire to do much of anything when it comes to actually winning football games. And I guess in a similar way, like Kamara, though the skill, the ability might not all be there, he's still got enough left in the tank to go contribute elsewhere, if that's where his mind is going with this entire situation. Because honestly, he could be a Saint for life, but you know if that happens, you're not getting anywhere. And you find yourself in this situation where for years Alvin Kamara had been the workhorse guy. You're constantly getting yourself banged up. And the team as a whole has virtually nothing to show for it. At all. Now, of course, there are a lot of different things that go into that. But I can't sit here and tell you for sure that Alvin Kamara is content at all with the direction here. Shit's crazy. Denzel Ward would also miss the game on Sunday with a calf injury, and as of yesterday, per NFL Insiders, he still was not practicing at all. I mean, I guess they're going to try their best to evaluate him throughout the rest of this week into Saturday, I suppose, and then come out with a decision before the game on Sunday. Sucks. Absolutely. And even though the Bears might have won that game anyways, one could argue that with his services out there, with what he can constantly provide for you as a cornerback prospect, I would think that the game would have been far different from that aspect if he was out there covering some of these Chicago Bears wide receivers, man. I'm just going to be honest with you. Like, I ain't going to lie. Again, they were slinging the ball all over the yard, and they were imposing a great amount of balance in their system. Sometimes there's nothing you can do about that, but I'm sure there would have been a bit more hesitation to just toss it Denzel Ward's way and just say, fuck it. He's still that caliber of cornerback. And it would have made things a little easier on everybody else. Because with having Denzel Ward out, you essentially made a guy like Tyson Campbell your number one cornerback. Like, think about how that fucking went for you. Tyson Campbell is your number one guy. You already had a problem the second you made that shit happen. And you got blown out by 28 points. So you'd very much like to get Denzel Ward back as soon as possible. Quentin Johnston would be questionable initially with a groin injury per Adam Schefter last week, and then would be ruled out of the Chargers game. He was also caught in a weird spot, I suppose. I mean, given how the injury has affected the flow of the offense, I'm not very sure that Quentin Johnston would change much. The Chargers genuinely didn't throw the ball all that well, and they didn't have to win that game. It was far more of a defensive battle between two strong defenses. And ultimately, the Chargers won out to get themselves to 10 wins and have a fighting chance still to win the whole damn division, let alone potentially make the playoffs if things go a certain way for them. Quentin Johnston has honestly turned it around a little bit too. I'll be honest. Like, it was, as I mentioned before, not looking the greatest for him, but, especially in the first few games of the season, man, it looked as though he had finally started to turn a corner. Unfortunately for him, he was a little limited in action, but I mean, even with, less overall contributions, if things go a certain way over the next few games and he returns, there's a very real chance in which he could outperform his contributions from last year. He's currently sitting at 42 catches for 533 yards and 7 touchdown catches. So that's not too bad. And, I mean, compared to last year, where he had 7 fucking drops, he's only got 2 on the season right now. So, I mean, like, that is a step in the right direction, all things considered. And you just want the Chargers, if you're them and you're a fan of them, you want them to be able to keep this momentum going into the playoffs. Or at the very least, remain competitive and make sure that you have some form of an upper edge entering the postseason. So, Quentin Johnston, this iteration of him can only help that so much on a team that has a bundle of weapons at their disposal that are all trying to find their footing right now. TJ Watt would remain out of the game against the Dolphins because, as I had mentioned beforehand, he was dealing with something in his lungs. And it would eventually be stated by Adam Schefter that he would get surgery on this partially collapsed lung. They officially ruled him out with a chest issue, and his status to return is really up in the air at this point. I mean, like, hopefully he recovers well. Thank goodness they figured out what it was, because it honestly could have been something much worse, to be honest with you. But the main thing for him right now is to try to get back healthy and get back into a routine off the field before even thinking about getting back on this team. Yes, the Steelers do desperately need it, as the AFC North is that tight. They would love to have him in there, despite however many people want to come for his numbers over the past year and some change in like a consecutive streak of games where he might not have contributed as much as people would have expected given his contract. That's reasonable. But right now, in a situation like that, health is the main priority. So he needs to take out as much time as he possibly can to get back in rhythm there. That is just overall far more important. Sauce Gardner would be out of the Seahawks game with a calf injury. Justin Reid would initially be listed as questionable with a knee injury and would then be ruled out for the game against the Panthers. Kyler Gordon was officially placed on IR. The groin injury is still nagging him at this point, and that will mean that Gordon is going to miss at least the next 4 games with this given injury. They'll reevaluate him then. I mean, it's kind of brutal for a Bears team that literally has to face off against the Packers again in the next few days. I mean, they managed a little well without him in the first matchup. But for him to be that good of a slot corner at this moment, and you being somewhat weak in that area outside of him, that is just yet another cog on this Bears defense that is going to be pivotal to their success and has been pivotal to their success. Yes, they did beat the hell out of the Browns. It's the Browns at the end of the day. The Packers team, they were able to get these mismatches. And I know that you had Chauncey Gardner-Johnson just make the executive decision, given the injury to Kyler Gordon, to play slot corner with this Bears team when he signed there. Y'all remember he made that decision. Came out and said that was the direction in which he was going to take. And I figured as such. It hasn't worked out too bad for them, but at the same time, when it comes to this particular matchup, we know exactly what happened to him in the slot the first time. Got beaten on multiple occasions with the sheer speed of Christian Watson. He didn't even need to resort to any technique or pristine release or anything to get off the line. No, he just straight up beat him, running stride for stride far past where Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was supposed to be in those moments. And a couple of those led to easy touchdowns. Some of the easiest touchdowns Christian Watson will ever catch in his life. And I feel like for this matchup specifically, of course you're going to have CJ Gardner-Johnson out there. That's a strong defensive asset in the secondary no matter what. And, of course, like, teammate issues in the locker room and things like that are a different story. It's why the Texans moved on from him initially. But you would want to have somebody faster out there, accounting for Christian Watson, or maybe even Jaden Reed at points. And I feel like Kyler Gordon could fill that role pretty easily. He'd make life a living hell for them. And when it comes to Christian Watson, there's honestly, a stigma around Chauncey Gardner-Johnson that he can be a menace, of course. And we've definitely seen that time and again. But in terms of truly getting physical with him, I'm not going to lie to you. Like Kyler Gordon, when it comes to the tangible aspects, like even with him being 5'11", 200 pounds, Christian Watson would certainly be feeling Kyler Gordon on him consistently. He is not going to let him just blaze right by him without any consequences whatsoever. Like, you're going to pay for constantly trying to go over the middle like that, or even thinking that you're going to instantly beat him off press. Kyler Gordon's going to show way more fight than that. And ultimately, a game like that on Saturday is going to be decided by that kind of effort, that kind of physicality. So I don't know. Rashod Bateman would initially be questionable with an ankle injury for the game against the Bengals and would be ruled out. Nick Chubb would also be questionable with a rib injury that he suffered in the game against the Chiefs last week, per Adam Schefter, and would then be ruled out of the game against the Cardinals, which is why they called up Jordan in the first place. seems like they're doing quite fine with that. Rome Odunze was initially set to return. He had dealt with a foot injury in the first game against the Packers that kept him out. He was in progress to make a return last Sunday, and then he ended up in the pregame warmups. He somehow re-aggravated the same foot injury and was then taken out of the ball game with that completely, not playing at all as a result. And the Bears, again, ended up being just fucking fine, with Luther Burden III stepping up and DJ Moore doing DJ Moore things. Because, of course, his status is still up in the air for this Packers game. But from what I've seen from NFL insiders, it appears that he is closer to a return. If they can actually get him back, that would be great. You would just hope that this time, this can be for real. That's what I'd say. Trevon Diggs would be out with a knee injury. Granted, he is still in a situation where I believe he's on IR. I really don't know how to explain it. Like, he'd been doing solid for a few weeks of the season, and then all of a sudden, he's just absolutely nowhere to be found at all. I mean, yes, the Cowboys' defense is that bad, regardless. But, if we're viewing Trevon Diggs as a key corner for this team, one of the best they've got to offer, regardless of what you have to say about him, they're still going to need one of their better players out there. And whether it be the injuries, whether it be anything else potentially going on behind the scenes, I don't know. He just has not been able to play. And that just comes off as very strange from the outside looking in. In terms of something very strange, I had something initially come across my feed and then had to do just a little bit of digging into it to get some context here. All this relates to the Houston Texans again, but not anything with them going on in terms of playing the game on the field. It in fact has to do with something that is quite the development off of it. And it deals with someone who apparently has a minority stake in the entire franchise. So with that, you have Javier Loya. And when I saw the name, I wasn't familiar with the person at all. But after reading a few things here, it's mentioned from an AP article that, quote, the 56-year-old Loya is chairman and CEO of OTC Global Holdings, a trading company he co-founded in 2007. He has had a stake in the Houston franchise since its inception in 2002, end quote. And okay, that's some interesting history. Like, the man, if he's based down there and he's been invested in the team for all these years, okay, that's solid. He also, given that, has a business to the side that he co-founds, and I am not really sure, honestly, of how much, they make in terms of revenue per year. But it's safe to say that if he's reached this point, they are more than likely doing just fine as a company. But in those situations, typically things, stocks in those companies, or any sort of entity for that matter, can go down for a number of different reasons that we see all the time. Anytime you see a scandal involving a company or even a person in a singular company go down, you have stocks dropping. Competition can also cater to one brand over another, and that may drive up stocks in one area and drive it down in another. A lot of different stuff can happen when it comes to trading and investing in a lot of real life situations, even if we are dealing with simulations, numbers, projections, you name it, they can still have sometimes adverse effects on those things. And even the simplest ones, those that may seem small on the surface, could be, again, quite the slash to a company who is looking to make a profit at every turn. Now, again, those things could be the case, yes. And obviously, we mentioned that Loya is a part of the Texans' ownership group in a way, with a fair enough stake in the company. There's somewhere, essentially, the person who told the AP this had to speak on anonymity because typically ownership stakes aren't publicly disclosed, or at least they aren't supposed to be. And I mean, that's kind of become a little bit of practice. We hear about different, acquisitions of these kinds all the time. How many times have we heard on the news about celebrities, for example, putting small investments and stocks into different sports teams and different sports leagues in different companies outside of the realm and things of that sort? It's constantly happening. But again, if that's the case, then it's like, okay, it's completely advised against doing, because at that point you are legitimately trying to pocket watch. Legitimately. Even if it is less than 1%, if you make enough money as a collective franchise, that could be worth a whole hell of a lot. And in those situations, these people running those organizations don't really want it to be anybody else's business. Especially if things seem to be unfair, working to the advantage of a completely different group of people behind the scenes. They don't need all of that backlash. So they would much rather keep that in-house as much as they possibly can. In mentioning Loya, though, why do I mention him? Well, he's actually been in some fucking crazy stuff. He, in fact, has not been around the team or been conducting operations with the team in around the last 2.5 years. It all dates back to something that could be incredibly vile, depending on how you look at it. So, as this quote from a writer's article states, Loya was initially charged with first-degree, I can't say that, 5 counts of first-degree SA and 1 count of third-degree SA abuse in that realm after an arrest warrant was issued in May 2023 for an alleged incident at parties at his home in Louisville in 2022, as it states. So, we're getting ourselves into situations where this man, back a couple years ago, was alleged to have completely violated a number of different customs in this manner. I don't really know about the nature of these parties, but one could imagine that if these are taking place at his own house, these are probably more casual, social style situations taking place here. That's probably the nature of these particular events, if this is going on in your own house. And I guess with these initial charges that were issued a couple years back, dating back to a situation that took place in 2022. I don't even think I heard anything about publicly, interestingly enough. Maybe there's a chance in which he could have completely taken advantage of that flow of these parties. Like, hey, we're already here in my house, just chilling, kicking back. And at that point, a number of different things could creep into a person's mind at that point. For Loya, what they believed at the time, and may still believe to this point, is that you didn't have the best intentions in mind when it came to socializing in this aspect. When it came to trying to embrace other people in that setting, you might have had a completely different motive here. And one thing could have possibly led to another, which ultimately ended in all of these charges here. Like, we're talking about 6 different SA charges, and then that type of charge on the first degree. That is not your typical situation. And that would be advised against, that would be strongly frowned upon, and it's definitely illegal for any person to be doing that, let alone somebody engaged in a specific profession like the NFL with the Texans. And I'm not going to lie, yeah, I could say a lot about that not being detailed as much publicly, but you'd figure that at some point the Texans got word of that going down. And once they did that, once they went through looking at this themselves and trying to get the full evidence, the full context from both sides, they eventually came to a conclusion in that they could not keep Loya around at this point. They had to start distancing themselves from that situation. Now again, these were initial charges. These are still allegations at this point. So there wasn't a clear knowledge on whether or not these events in question were actually true, whether or not he actually did them. That was unknown. But once you get yourself in a situation where you are associated with something like that, with the Texans being in the position that they're in right now, and honestly were in a few years back, that is the last thing that they needed to try to tackle as they were actively trying to build out their team and kind of reestablish their own identity as a franchise. That, if they allowed that to remain there, could set them back for quite some time. And so they decided to let him walk. Like I mentioned to start it out, he has not been involved in much of anything with the organization over the past 2.5 years. No involvement whatsoever with them. And that's exactly how the Texans won it in a way, is they've been able to find a little bit of success and potentially carve out a new direction for themselves in this specific decade, or the way that this current roster looks. Like Loya, I'm sure that deep down he is very much thrilled to have that be the case with a team that he had invested in for so long. And I'm sure that he'd want to be back out there doing what he can to support the team in his specific role. But these kinds of things, especially if they were all found to be true, are just not acceptable at all. You can't have it. You can't have it whatsoever. So, with that, he would remain out for all this time, and in 2024, there would be a little bit of an update to the situation, with him, quote, accepting a misdemeanor charge of harassment with intent to annoy in 2024, and 7 SA charges against him were dropped, end quote. So that's a little interesting. Harassment with intent to annoy. Again, I am nowhere near that specific state. This all took place in Kentucky. But I'm like, how do you get to a point where you have one charge in the first degree, as severe as that is, already, and then you have all of these accompanying SA charges, all managing to get dropped for harassment with intent to annoy? So now the biggest question there would be, okay, what the hell truly happened? Because you don't go from those extremes, like those are extreme charges to be throwing out at the first go round. And we drop from that all the way down to something as basic as harassment with intent to annoy. So there's definitely not something adding up there. And eventually those are things that we might be able to figure out if more information comes out from this specific case. But even with all that, in all this time, I guess not much has been substantiated. Nevertheless, the NFL would actually make a decision on this in a few days ago, I should say, as their official statement stated via Reuters. Quote, in March 2024, Texans minority owner Javier Loya entered an offer plea in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. With the full support and cooperation of the Texans, the league has subsequently conducted an investigation, following which the commissioner determined Mr. Loya's actions violated the NFL's personal conduct policy. Mr. Loya has been suspended indefinitely from the league and will be eligible to apply for reinstatement no earlier than June 2026. He's also been fined $500,000. Mr. Loya has no involvement with the club or league affairs since being charged in the spring of 2023. End quote. So that would be their official decision, and that would end this investigation. Clearly, with what they were given behind the scenes, of course, because literally, from my perspective, there was not a word about this in the public eye at all, unless I just completely missed something. You know, it has been a few years ago, but that evidence brought to them ended up being enough for them to decide, okay, look, even if the actions themselves might not all be true, you have now put yourself in a risque situation where they are actively pursuing these charges against you. And it makes it look even worse that you decided to just plead guilty to these things. Again, we, as the general audience, weren't there with him. We don't know what he did or did not do in those specific situations at these parties in his home. But they figured that something was not quite right about this at all, no matter what the verdict was going to be in this specific situation. Because as a person representing the league and the Houston Texans in this situation, you put them in an embarrassing light. You put the Texans in an embarrassing light as well. And in some way, shape, or form, you gotta pay for that. And so this is the result of all of that. Interesting that he can reinstate himself in just a few short months. I'm sure that, if things were a bit clearer, honestly, that punishment could be way worse. But to each their own, I suppose. just a weird situation overall. You hope that none of those things are true, but it's very hard for me to say that for sure at the moment. The Panthers would sign Isaiah Simmons to their practice squad. Brandon Ayuk would be placed on the reserve and left squad list. I've never heard of reserve left squad in my life. But essentially, from just seeing that and understanding the whole of the Brandon Ayuk situation over essentially the past couple, well, I guess in a few short months it would be the past couple, we'll just say a year, almost 2 years to this point, ever since that Super Bowl against the Chiefs, the second one. It has just been a downhill slide for this relationship between Ayuk and the 49ers at this point. We couldn't figure out a proper number on a contract. Ayuk was actually contemplating leaving for quite a second, came back on very awkward terms, and again, as I've constantly stated, has not been healthy enough to suggest him warranting the contract that he currently has with this team right now. So you have all that going on, and to make matters even worse, now his contract is getting voided for next season. It just did not look to this point as though the relationship between those two sides was salvageable enough for them to want to retain Brandon Ayuk's services anymore. And clearly, by them putting him on this kind of list, reserve/left squad, they already think that it's over. They already think that he is no longer a core piece that fits into their equation moving forward whatsoever. They want nothing to do with him if they're going to make that decision. The injuries are just the icing on the cake, but there was a real fracture there that they just clearly haven't been able to recover from. And I mean, even if I'm saying that right now, we don't actually know what's going to go on with Brandon Ayuk until we get down into the nitty-gritty of the new league year, into the nitty-gritty of the offseason, where potential moves could be made up until certain points. So anything is really on the table at this point, but it just leans closer and closer and closer into the notion that he's gone and he's not returning. That's how it's already been, given the injuries that he's dealt with over this time. Jadeveon Clowney was dealing with an injury beforehand, but would be healthy for the Vikings game. Darnell Washington was still reeling from a concussion that he had been facing against the Ravens, and was still healthy enough to play and terrorize the Dolphins' defense on Monday night. Jeremy Chin would remain in with a back injury after dealing with one earlier in the week. Parker Washington would be in despite a hip injury that he had been confronting earlier in that week as well. Tyler Lockett would be questionable with a wrist injury initially per Adam Schefter, but would play in the Raiders game. Play in the game against the Eagles. Lukas Van Ness would be in despite injury. And then for some other things that happened during and I guess after a few of the games here, Tyquan Thornton would suffer a concussion during the heat of the action between the Chiefs and the Chargers. I saw it in post, and I could see where the frustration lied, because you had Chiefs players at that time trying to confront Tony Jefferson Sr. after the words, and there were a lot of flags surrounding that. Then you look at a replay of the hit, because, context is everything, and you see that the man literally led with his helmet right into Tyquan Thornton's, directly over the middle. He had no chance of seeing it, and just completely blindsided. And he, in an instant, was knocked out. That is the textbook dirty play, and Tony Jefferson Sr. would be flagged for it. Definitely, because you can't miss a call like that. Meanwhile, they're trying to get Tyquan Thornton off of the field, and I would hope that he's now okay at this point. I don't know about his status for the next Chiefs game, though, but we will definitely see about that. Christian Watson would suffer a chest injury during the game against the Broncos. In fact, it happened as I watched him post, literally on the interception that Jordan Love threw to Patrick Surtain II. And for a while, Christian Watson just wasn't getting back up. They actually, after the game, per multiple reports from NFL insiders and Adam Schefter, that he was taken to the hospital to get this thing checked out completely. And they would, in a few short hours, remove him from the hospital, allow him to return on the team plane with the Packers as a whole. And he's still been limited in practice to this point. They said that they're going to try to run him through some things. Even he also told like a beat writer or a reporter for the Green Bay team that he felt as though he could be good enough to go on Saturday against the Bears. So that's promising. It is definitely a good thing to hear, especially when you consider all of the other injuries that they have been facing to this point. But hey, man. The Jets would fire defensive coordinator Steve Wilks. And honestly, this is just going to look into his entire flow as a coordinator in the league. Because to be honest, it feels at this point as though it's become a pattern for Steve Wilks. Like, we know at this point that he's not good as a head coach. He's already proven that in Arizona. He's already proven that in Carolina before. But, I don't know, as a defensive coordinator, like, it feels like he has a promising shot to be good. And he has done that in spurts consistently. Like, he burst onto the scene in 2017 in the first place, leading one of the more respectable Panthers defenses at that time. And that would ultimately work into him getting a job with the Cardinals before that disaster of a season. And he'd constantly been rotating around. You know, the Browns in 2019 were also a somewhat respectable defense, given the situation. And, I mean, they still felt as though at the end of that season, it just didn't fit their style at all. Out of the league for years, again, getting back to Carolina and just completely tanking as a head coach. But then before you knew it, in 2023, again, he was able to lead one of the best defenses in the NFL. Period. Like, that is wild to consider. So he's gotten these flashes consistently of being a great defensive coordinator. I don't think there's any question about that. And so, hell, you know, even with him being off for a year, you get him in 2025, earlier in the year, hire him on your staff, and with the promise that this Jets defense showed last year, this could have turned into something special. And what's come of that now has been one of the worst possible outcomes they could have envisioned. I mean, dude, like, that 48-point outing given up by New York to Jacksonville was just icing on the cake. But to be honest, the way the season has gone entirely, man, you can make an argument that Steve Wilks should have already been gone from this team. Would it have mattered much? No, because the Jets are a dysfunctional organization all around. It wouldn't have mattered who they brought in necessarily. But my thing is, like, a change was probably already due at this point. Because here's a man in Steve Wilks who you trust to do the right thing in terms of leading an entire defensive unit. And what he proceeds to do is tank them all the way down into the bottom half of the league in a number of different categories. Most categories. at this point. They legitimately can't stop anything. To the point where they went through that historic stretch of not being able to force a single turnover through at least like the first 8 or 9 weeks of the season. Then you finally force one. And as I mentioned in the game, you still had yet to force an interception all year long, despite facing off against the quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, who had become fairly turnover prone by this point. Like the man just a few weeks ago had a fucking 3 interception ball game against the Cardinals of all teams. And he still managed to win that, fine. But it hasn't been difficult to make Trevor Lawrence make mistakes this season. And you still struggle to get him out of rhythm at all, while allowing him to have his best career day as a passer in the NFL. So a firing of Wilks could have come a long time ago. A long time ago. Man, I don't know. It's like all around. All the essential things of a Steve Wilks defense are just getting completely chewed up and spit out by these damn offenses that are constantly out coaching and out scheming him. They do not have a run stopping unit to speak of. And when it comes to their secondary, even when Sauce Gardner was there, even when Michael Carter II was there, they were tailing off. They were tailing off completely. They had already given up multiple 30 bombs on the year before then. Not to mention the pass rush. Outside of a few players, like Will McDonald IV is still pretty damn good. But a lot of the success that you had in that front also just completely waned off. Like, where the hell did that go? You'd think that would increase with Steve Wilks' guidance. And yet, we are in a case where that was just absolutely nowhere to be found. The shit, man, fucking crazy, bro. Absolutely crazy. Fair decision for them. I don't know who would replace him, though. Oh, yeah, I already mentioned that. The Jets weren't done in terms of moves, as they would release Allen Lazard a few days back, per multiple reports from NFL insiders, while they also extended Jeremy Ruckert to a 2-year, $10 million contract, per Jeremy Fowler of ESPN. And I'm not going to lie, it's one of those that could be questioned. Like Ruckert, obviously, the Ohio State man, you got to give him a shout out. You know what I'm saying? He hasn't been used exclusively as a threat in the receiving game. Like, he's never been asked to do that with this team. As much as I would probably be interested and intrigued by seeing that happen, it just hasn't been there. He doesn't even have a receiving season over 200 yards yet. And he just caught his first NFL touchdown pass, or catch rather, this season. But as a blocker, which is what I would think that they view him as right now, they must have a solid kind of read on him in that aspect and think that he's valuable there. Also potentially getting special teams reps as well. That could be another component. I mean, you know, like, there's definitely a possibility there. Like, he's, to this point, gotten a fair amount of special teams reps over the years. And, you know, his offensive reps, when healthy this year, have been about the same consistently as he's gotten healthier, I would say, and gotten more trust from the overall coaching staff and roster at large. So credit to him for being able to get himself in that position. Marshawn Lloyd, the Packers running back, re-aggravated a hamstring injury that he had previously been dealing with for Adam Schefter, and he would be placed on IR. I don't even think he's taken a single snap this season, if I'm not mistaken. His draft was always kind of frowned upon a little bit. There wasn't too much of an understanding as to why they made the decision in terms of selecting him in the NFL draft last year. And it's just unfortunate that, again, he was drafted fairly high, third round pick. You're thinking that alongside Josh Jacobs, he could be that complementary piece. Instead, he's only played in a single game to this point and has not contributed much. He's been mostly injured outside of that. And in his place, you've gotten guys like Emmanuel Wilson taking over that role. You've gotten guys like Chris Brooks, who they managed to pick up from Miami, taking over that role. So it's unfortunate I don't know in that situation. Like, it's going to be an uphill climb for him in terms of being able to get back on this. Being one of the older rookies already, he's literally going to be 25 on January 5th and has only logged 6 rushes and 15 yards in a single game. Period. Flat out. With a lot of the attention that those other backs have been getting, and you're obviously not overtaking Josh Jacobs' job, I just don't know if there's a world in which he'd be able to beat out some of that other competition come time for training camp. Especially if he's going to be at a disadvantage in only one game. He got just a small glimpse into what the playbook looks like. He, again, has been injured and away from that element for so much time that even with him being in his third year, technically, he's still going to be so far behind the 8 ball. Like, I don't care how much film you watch. I don't care how much practice you commit to. All those things are obviously important, and you need to do them in order to become better as a player. And that's fucking obvious. Like, you can't just coast your way to that success if you truly want to assert yourself as one of the top talents in any sport or in any profession for that matter. You have to put the fucking work and time in. You have to put the dedication in. It is as simple as that. There's no avoiding that whatsoever. But no matter how much you commit to that, there's still nothing in this sense like going out on that football field and actually being able to experience the playbook in real time. Figure out the right tells to potentially make adjustments on the fly and switch up different plays. Learn how to time up specific assignments, whether it comes to you subscribing to a run or potentially having to enter pass protection. Things of that nature. You can learn them behind the scenes, but you also have to be able to go out there and consistently apply them on any given Sunday and Monday, sometimes Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday, Thursdays, sometimes Fridays, sometimes Saturdays, etc., etc. That's how this is. It is an application thing. And simply put, your best ability is availability at this point. Marshawn Lloyd, for one reason or another, you can't control injuries, but he just simply hasn't been there. And that's incredibly unfortunate. For a man who, again, being drafted at that age, he'd be considered to be as ready of a running back prospect as possible. And, with a lot of the moves that the Packers have made over just the past few off seasons, one could say that, hey, they are in a situation where they are trying to win now. I mean, you don't just flat out trade for Micah Parsons for no reason, even though, again, it might not end that well this season given the injury. So you're clearly trying to get a step in the right direction And rather than get unproven talent to complement Josh Jacobs, you wanted someone who could at least alleviate the burden as a solid and reliable back in his own nature. Because Marshawn Lloyd was definitely doing damage at USC. Don't get it fucked up. Like, the talent for him is there. But he's just never been able to put that on display. Really, ever. And I don't know what the Packers would decide in this situation. But it's going to put them in a completely different mode of thinking, to be honest. As for another running back, the Cardinals replaced Bam Knight on IR. Bam Knight, Zonovan Knight, has been a player who has gone through a lot. I still remember when this man was on the damn Jets. Why do I remember that? Should I remember that? Probably not. But in the few games that he had gotten with Arizona this season, in relief for the Trey Bensons and Amari DeMercados of the world, he actually put together a decent season. 269 yards and 4 touchdowns. By far was going to outpace anything that he had done in his career to this point. And it's definitely solid to see that he was able to make that happen. You know, this was a man who literally spent the last year just completely out of the league at that point. I didn't even really remember him taking that many snaps with the damn Lions of all teams. But by that point, no team called him up. And, you know, at that point, when you are in that situation, you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for somebody to give you a chance, for somebody to give you that call, to give you a second opportunity to prove yourself. And honestly, I don't know if he'd ever turn into a guy that's going to be a lead back for any team. But with what he's put together on short notice, it's safe to say that, hey, he might have gotten himself way back into the talk of a few NFL circles to potentially be a complimentary situational running back on certain teams. The jury would still be out on whether or not those teams would be contenders. The Cardinals haven't proven to be this season. But, like, he's done that for himself, and you have to applaud that. Being placed on IR, being out for essentially the rest of the season with that designation just takes all of that away in what could have been a career year for him overall, and in ways it already has been. It's just like, damn. You know, that is definitely tough. Miami, they would do the thing. They would bench Tua Tagovailoa yesterday, as Adam Schefter reported, in what would be breaking news at the time. And in his place, they would start Quinn Ewers, who's going to make his first NFL start on Sunday against the Bengals, and is probably going to have a field day against that defense regardless, because that's just how Cincy works on the defensive side of the football. But in all seriousness, I don't know if I can say that I'm as surprised about it. I mean, it's definitely something that initially, as I saw it come through, I'm like, that is a little mind-blowing. I can't lie and say that that wasn't the case to me initially. But, you know, having some time now to let it simmer down in my mind and think over it a little bit, in reality, it's like something like this was bound to happen, to be honest. And I don't know what it could mean for the future, but what I am damn sure of is that, man, it just poses another whirlpool of problems for this Dolphins team. I mean, let's look at the situation itself, right? Because you had options. And, you know, apparently Mike McDaniel had a press conference talking about it. He still had the option at that point to bench him for Zach Wilson, a quarterback who, maybe he's been much maligned in the media over the years. Some of it has been warranted, I suppose. Some of it not. Fine. But he's put in a ton of service hours at this point. And instead, you decide to go with the rookie, the unproven rookie. To that point, I guess you can kind of see where Mike McDaniel is coming from. The whole season has been an abject failure for this Dolphins squad. And no, in Tua Tagovailoa's situation, he might not have been helped by some of the injuries. When it comes to dealing with Tyreek Hill especially, your most dynamic wide receiver, just going down with a lower leg injury like that earlier in the year, you had already been struggling, by the way, to get connected with him completely. Chemistry following all that talk in the offseason and at the end of last season definitely seeped into this one. I don't think there's a question about that at all. But you don't even get a chance to turn that around before his season is a complete and total wrap. And while they were able to rally back over the last few games, they'd won their last 4 before going to Pittsburgh and just completely... Even with all that being said, like the play, and you have to credit Tua Tagovailoa as well. I saw something where he stated, okay, at a point it comes down to my play. It hasn't been there over the last few games, essentially. It hasn't been up to par with what I've been putting on display in years past, and that's fair. Like, we are dead ass talking about 20 to 15 touchdown to interception ratio. If we're going to go at it by the hard numbers and not break it down into the decimal points and everything like that. A 20 to 15 turnover touchdown to interception ratio. And not to mention the amount of lost fumbles that he's had this season as well. Like, those gaffes, especially with multi-interception games earlier in the season. Like, I think he opened up the year against the Pats, if I'm not mistaken, literally throwing 3 damn interceptions. Or was it the Colts? I can go and check this right now. But you have those kinds of performances that early on, immediately you have already set the wrong tone when you come out looking like that to start the year. And it just has not gotten much better. Yeah, Indianapolis, you get a multi-interception game there in what was just a lackluster performance entirely. And then you have back-to-back 3 interception games. We remember that, Tom, where you, after the Chargers loss, call out your teammates and then proceed to walk it back, have Mike McDaniel disagree with you, and then come out with a completely lackluster game of just 100 passing yards and 3 interceptions. And I know I was definitely talking a massive amount of shit when it came to covering that game, because that was just completely inexcusable stuff. But it's those kinds of little things. And I guess you could, in a way, tie it all back to that. Like, the fact that you come out with those performances and you still have that call out of other teammates not showing up to players-only meetings and things like that looming over your head, and already having side-eyes take place in the locker room, that couldn't have put him in too great of a position there. And again, the play, if it was going well, if the team was winning, as I said in that video, would Tua Tagovailoa have still done that if they were winning? Because it does cure all. One could still question that even as we sit here right now thinking about the situation. And if he was truly able to step up his play, truly able to elevate this roster no matter how much they've gone through, and get the effective wins, not even necessarily put up the gaudiest numbers in the world, just do your job, and help us get the win more often than not. He also probably would have been quite fine in that situation. But neither of those things happen. It's just been a complete and total stagnation, even in the wins. And granted, those are situations where you have to credit other things picking up over time. The rushing attack was looking solid for a few week stretch. De'Von Achane was finding all the rushing lanes at this point. They'd finally started to turn it around there. They had their defense playing okay enough to last. But ultimately, man, the sentiments still remain the same to this point. They just had never been able to find their footing this season. And that continued into that atrocious loss on Monday night. Mike McDaniel is also in a situation where it's like, is there anything else that I can really do? I could imagine that it was a difficult decision for him to make. Genuinely. You're dealing with a man in Tua Tagovailoa who was still on a 4-year, $212 million contract. And your alternative options are a guy in Zach Wilson who is now a backup after also failing to live up to his own expectations that were set for him just off one dynamic fucking throw at the BYU Pro Day. In all the pre-draft work and the combine work. That shit single-handedly vaulted him to the number 2 overall pick. Just think about that, right? I mean, shit, man. That alone, and nothing else of substance to show for it, ultimately led him to a situation where he was now starting to get passed around the league. And ultimately not being trusted to be the starter anymore in his own right. To where Wilson, in a similar boat, had to get subbed out for Joe Flacco back when he was a Jet. Then Quinn Ewers, as solid as he was at Texas, even there, he had his own questions surrounding him because of the strength of the overall Texas roster and how little it appeared to some people that the roster and Sarkisian, for that matter, asked him to truly do in that offense. Like, even his season last year, the Texas team was mostly successful. They got all the way to the damn CFP semifinal, for that matter. They got all the way there. So, you can't say that it was a complete and total failure, but they wanted to win the whole thing. And when it came down to it, when it came down to some of these bigger moments, they did not have Quinn Ewers rise above those situations. Definitely tough to deal with there. All the after effects of that situation. So, what really do you gain from it? I don't know how much. At this point, we're just throwing darts at the wall. We are trying to see what sticks. And at the end of the day, we've constantly spammed the Tua Tagovailoa dart. We've spammed it. We've put as much faith in it as we've possibly been able to this point. We've gone to war for it. And nothing has really come out of it. We are finding ourselves in the same situation every single time towards the tail end of the year. And maybe Quinn Ewers can find himself engineering a brief spark. I don't know about anything too substantial, because that would imply that, hey, the Dolphins could get in the playoffs. I don't know if they can make that happen right now. I can't lie and act like that's the case. But I mean, anything is still possible. And again, at the very least, like every single team out there who is not bad enough to get a top pick in the NFL draft, you want to finish out the season strong. You don't want to leave all of these things just completely on the table like that. And I suppose that Mike McDaniel ultimately had to sit down and think to himself, like, damn, if we keep on rolling with Tua Tagovailoa, we are not going to have a great end to the season. And given how there's still a situation to where it's like, okay, we really don't know what's going to happen with Mike McDaniel at the end of the season. Even with them coming out and saying after they fired Chris Grier that they're sticking with Mike McDaniel, I think they mentioned that it's like, okay, there's still a chance that some new development could occur when it comes to the offseason and them potentially making a more direct and solid decision at that point of time. So, I mean, there you go there. There's still a very real possibility in which you have Mike McDaniel potentially losing his job. And it could all be dictated, I think, as that report said, by how Mike McDaniel finishes off the year. And yes, he's honestly done solid to this point if he's won the last 4 ball games. But man, some of them, especially when you look at the Saints game, have not come in a very convincing manner. Like, even with them getting off to hot starts in those games, aside from a few of them, you just have stretches in these games where the offense repeatedly goes on cold spurt after cold spurt. And you're wondering why in that situation you don't get cleaner play. So it's not just enough, clearly, for Mike McDaniel to win these games. But we are trying to perform as... it's not going to be perfect, but damn near as close to perfection as you possibly can. To save your own face. And ultimately have your faith in the team be reinvigorated. Have their faith in your viability as a coach be reinvigorated. That's how this is set to work. And the fact that he came to the conclusion that Quinn Ewers could be trusted to do that over a man in Tua Tagovailoa who had accrued this much experience, who was getting paid like a franchise quarterback, is definitely embarrassing. I think it was mentioned that Tua Tagovailoa was frustrated about the move. I can't be surprised by that. But again, the play was just completely lackluster. And in terms of what this could mean for Tua Tagovailoa in the offseason, I really don't know. Like, I don't think that there is anything that would force him to be moved or anything like that. I don't think we're getting into that extreme territory. But it definitely sends a message. And it should, if anything else, and I'll end it with that, if anything else, it should light a fire in him. It truly should. Because, you know, I don't have a problem with the frustration in that sense. It's like, you know that on any given Sunday, you should be the guy, no matter how bad things are looking. You should be the guy that they should have enough trust in to go out there and win the damn football game for the team. You should be that guy at this point. And they aren't telling you that you aren't anymore, at least at the moment. And even if this is something temporary, like, that is not something that should just be cast aside. Because there's now a sense of fragility there. Like, yes, typically you are that. But you've got to constantly earn that on a season-to-season, week-to-week basis. And at any moment, if they feel as though you aren't performing the way you're supposed to be, they can revoke that from you at any point of time they choose. Like, I'm sure that Tagovailoa, especially given all that he's dealt with over the past few years when it comes to the injuries alone, I don't think you can question the man's passion to play the damn game. But he knows that he's got to perform, and he now has an understanding of, like, it is not a guarantee. Even when he gets into next season, even when he goes through training camp, it is not a guarantee for him to constantly be named the starter and constantly be relied upon as a franchise quarterback. He's got to consistently earn it. So I think that's what this does here. The Dolphins would also release Matthew Judon as well, which made sense. Like, literally, there was a play with him, man. There was a play with him, bruh. He was supposed to cover Kenneth Gainwell out of the backfield in, like, the later stretch of the game. And he's on a curl flat, which, again, he's never been a pass coverage guy. I don't know why you're asking him to do something he's never been accustomed to doing, but that's besides the point. Nonetheless, he was supposed to be handling that, and as Aaron Rodgers steps outside of the pocket, he goes to chase after Aaron Rodgers and then just leaves that area open as he's just trying to make a decision and pick between what form of coverage he wants to endure. He goes for the contain and leaves that check down wide open for Gainwell to turn upfield and get a conversion deep in their own red zone already. Man, it's tough. Like, you figured, again, if you're Miami, you came into this knowing that this was going to be a rental and nothing long-term. But the entire defense as a whole has just been terrible. Matthew Judon, if anything, is still a solid piece to have. But, you know, when it comes to him trying to account for being a great pass rusher in his own right, and then having to deal with a team that did lose Bradley Chubb at the trade deadline. Or, well, I guess Jalen Phillips. Bradley Chubb was still there. What am I talking about? But yeah, you lost Jalen Phillips at the trade deadline. You already came into this thing having a ton of your cornerbacks just completely out, period, for the season. So you were already weaker there, and it was going to be difficult. They needed a truly effective pass rush, and they just didn't have it. They expected it from Matthew Judon, and that's kind of their mistake. I mean, yes, he could still be serviceable, but the man literally has not put up a single sack this season. He's got his lowest amount of tackles in quite some time as well. Only a TFL to show for it in 3 quarterback hits. You know, the pressures could be a completely different thing, but it didn't even look in that game. When it came to the Steelers matchup, he wasn't even getting there. And granted, you know, the Steelers were doing this in the same way that the Colts were doing it with Phillip Rivers. You are not trying to get Aaron Rodgers completely banged up like they already have this season. And granted, there were a few other pressures in the game. There were a few other sacks contributed by other Dolphins players in this matchup. I mean, hell, Jordan Brooks even managed to get one on Aaron Rodgers. None of them had anything to do with what Matthew Judon was doing on a given play, though. And that's the crux of the matter. So, at that point, they could afford to let him go. He didn't cost that much in the first place. And he just was not doing anything with the team at all. At all. It's definitely unfortunate for him. For a guy that is coming off of being a pretty solid and reliable edge rusher in that 4-year stretch. But, you know, since that time, again, you don't want to continuously play this wrong side of 30 ball game. Like, he was doing all right with the Patriots, with the Falcons. But we just got here on a team that was already having their own defensive struggles, and he didn't really do much to help the matter. Drake London is currently day-to-day, still dealing with an injury. Mecole Hardman Jr. was set to return from IR. The Steelers would sign Trey Sermon, and Lamar Jackson is currently dealing with flu-like symptoms, so he did not practice on Wednesday as well, per reports from multiple NFL insiders. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.